Mark Zemansky, welcome back to the WP Minute.
Matt Medeiros, it's always a pleasure. Thank you
As
for having
if
me.
I'm dubbing it emergency pod. It's not quite an emergency pod, but we'll roll with it just to get the clicks. You put out a tweet. We talked about this when I jumped on the WP Town Hall podcast. Was it last week with Chris
Pearson, last week.
Pearson?
Yeah, maybe the week before, but yeah.
Frame the question, frame the tweet for me. It's in the title, but go ahead, say it. What did you tweet out?
Tweeted out, has the term open source been overused and therefore now largely misinterpreted?
Do you really feel that way?
Is this a therapy session? No. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I ask questions because I don't have I don't have all the answers. I look to everyone else to give me the wisdom, and then I can kind of like piece it together. And, you mentioned the WP Town Hall with Chris Pearson. Everybody should go check that out. Interesting thing is we're probably going to call on some of the things from there. This question had something to do with that, maybe. And obviously everything else that we've heard about in open source land and everything like that for the last however long. But the other big thing was the specific thing, the reason that I tweeted, when you see something and then you tweet, question out, was I was watching a video and it was about WordPress, like kind of alternatives and just other, like other platforms, basically, just kind of like looking into like Webflow and Wix and all the other ones. And I normally go to the comments and I just kind of see like what people are thinking because we're always trying to do that type of research. And somebody said something to the tune of, hey, this is a nice list, but there aren't any open source platforms on this list. As, again, you would think alternative to WordPress. WordPress is one of its biggest things is open source. So that's the concept there. And that got me thinking, I was like, I hear this word open source so much. It has value, but I just feel like it's one of those things that have been almost like the concept of searching for something on the internet has become now Googled. It's like, it's almost like you just say it and you think it means something, but it itself doesn't really mean the thing that you're talking about, but you've attached these other pieces to it. And I'm not saying that open source is bad. That's not what I'm saying with this. I just think that we just throw it around at this point, and I feel like there's way more things underneath it that we've literally seen in WordPress now when we kept saying like open source, open source, open source. But it's like there's really two different things. There's like the technology and like the code, and then there's also the actual brand and all that sort of other stuff there. So
let's play the clip from your WP Town Hall. This is where you posed the question to Chris Pearson about open source. Feedback loop. Here we go.
Like the open source, I know obviously you have literal physical experience back in like the early 2010s around this. And now, you mentioned that you're kind of starting your own, you're literally in the process of building your own platform. So like, what is we also, more context, we've had a couple, we always have conversations about open source and licensing and things like that. But we had a couple earlier episodes of WP Town Hall where we're actually talking more specifically, people were giving their thoughts. What's your high level on this whole thing, the way that WordPress handles it, the way that other platforms handle it, how you would handle it in your platform? What's your thought around the licensing portion?
All right, that's a great question. Open source to me is a huge red flag. All right, open source means two things to people at large. Number one, it means free. Number two, it means a community where I can contribute and feel welcome. I think the free part of it is the most legitimate part of it. I think the other one is something that people want to believe and want to feel good about, but I do not think is a necessary component in success.
We'll try to link up the rest of that episode in the show notes. WP Town Hall, search for it on Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcast, and you can listen to the last episode with Chris Pearson, featuring, of course, the hosts, Mark Zemansky and Kevin Geary. Yeah, I mean, I think Chris distills it down into those two areas. I agree with you that oftentimes people will start to give a new meaning to a word. This goes well beyond WordPress, but can give a meaning to a word or a phrase, and over time either dilute it, change it, or what have you. I think, and I did get into a bit of a debate with Chris on that podcast episode, because I called in and sort of talked to him about this open source thing. The thing that gets me, well, let me start with this. The thing that gets me with a Pearson, especially in the context of your episode, is on one hand, he's building success off of the back of an open source project, but at the same time saying that open source is a big red flag. I've seen and heard this across our space for a while now, and it's not something I can really wrap my head around. Because I look at that and go, well, don't you see the benefits of open source? Not saying you necessarily have to agree with everything in it or pull all the levers in it, which we'll break down in a moment, but can't you see the driving success that at least WordPress has had for the last 20 years? Maybe we're coming to a head of all that stuff, but still, if you launched Thesis, one of the most popular premium themes many years ago, and printed, I don't know, using his words, I think millions of dollars, 8 million of dollars. Man, don't you see the success in that? And I think that that's such a hard thing for me to wrap my head around when I see folks who have been successful because of open source also say, it's not really a thing that we should want. And it blows my mind, quite honestly.
Yeah, I mean, I think that using that as the example, and we had that episode. I thought there was a lot of interesting topics that brought up there, and the way that Chris kind of defines open source is, I think he says in there it's like it's free, and then I tried to understand it because it was kind of hard to understand like the exact way that he described it, and like he was talking about his platform and how it would be and all that sort of stuff. I don't know. Here's where my mind goes with this type of stuff. It's like open source until it gets to a point where it's not your type of open source anymore is one of the themes that I've seen. I think we kind of see that in WordPress a little bit. Like, now that it's getting to a point where, WordPress is just the biggest one that we can kind of pull from. And I'm not as extremely experienced with like a Drupal or anything else that are like this. You could probably tell me more there. I just think that at a certain point, it becomes where it was a free software that everyone loved, and in the run-up, it's incredibly beneficial to everyone for it to be open source. And again, I'm saying the word open source, and in my mind, I'm like, that's not what open source means. It's open source doesn't open source at the end of the day just means that the code is, everybody can see the code, and like, does it inherently mean that you can contribute to it? Or no? Because don't we get into like license territory, and licenses are different?
Yes, but
this is kind of what I'm talking about, though. Is like we say the word open source, and like, isn't there normally like a license attached to it? And I understand people are just talking, trying to get their points across quickly. But anytime I hear that, I'm like, it's more nuanced than that. You love that word.
I do love that phrase. It is always more nuanced than that. And in the thing, so there's like that Pearson component or viewpoint where, at the end of the day, I would just say, well, are you just greedy? Is that what this distills down to? Like, how can, like, you built a business off it? Presumably he still has thesis and themes and stuff. Like you're building a solution for WordPress. How could you hate or call out open source as a bad thing? It's literally the fuel for your business. So that part doesn't make sense. So there's that one camp. And then there's another camp where I think there's the extreme side of it where it's like, hey, this open source WordPress thing, it's for all of us to have a say, to have the direction. Don't like that pixel that you put on the dashboard. I want that changed, and I want it changed now. There's that extreme side where people feel like, well, we're all building this. This should all you should always have our say in this direction. And I don't agree with that side either. I'm much more, my own personal opinion is much more where DHH from Basecamp sort of sits, where the code is out there, it's open source, but I'm the driving force behind it. Like, this is my project or a collection of contributors' projects, and this is the direction it's going in. It's open source. We'll certainly listen to your feedback in the case of WordPress. We have GitHub, and of course we have the SVN version control for WordPress core, but let's just call it GitHub. Like, yeah, we'll take your feedback. You can open up an issue. You can say, yeah, change that button, add this feature. We'll listen. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get it. I think that WordPress has the best chance of like hey, if I just want this one feature, nobody's going to really listen to me. But if 100 people say they want this feature and they rally behind it, well, now we have a better chance. If 1,000 people do it, well, now we even have a better chance to get this deployed into WordPress. So I think WordPress gives us the best chance at that utopian scenario of open source, but I don't necessarily agree that it's guaranteed, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, where I'm going with that, where I'm thinking when you say all that is like, 10 years ago, did you feel like, from a top-down perspective of like WordPress, did you feel like it was more, we are building this together, it's all of us in this together, we're going in a direction that almost everybody wants, like everybody has a say and everything like that? Contrast that. I'm assuming I know the answer to that question. What is the answer to that question?
It's nuanced, but it's I've never felt like it was I personally never felt like I was a part of building WordPress. I always felt like I was a part of supporting WordPress, if that makes sense. Like I knew it would have its issues, you know,
Mhm.
but at the same time, like I was there for the mission of, you know, that's how I've always approached it. I never felt like it was a me thing, or I never said myself shoulder to shoulder with these other developers and said, I'm much more like, you guys are doing a great job. Let me help you. Let me help you get this to the finish line with what I can do. Which is an interesting point because I believe there are people who feel very opinionated and on both sides of like the positive and negative in the WordPress world, where they like, I know I've committed code and nobody's listening to me, or I committed code and they're not taking this, which should be. And that's something I don't know. I've never felt because I just can't do that. I just can't do that, you know?
Well, I don't have, again, I don't have specific answers, and I'm not trying to criticize anyone with the things that I say. I just think of it like, I really like this type of like human business psychology aspect. I don't know why, but I just like these nuanced topics. And I just feel that from a pattern recognition standpoint, which I also feel like I somewhat can do reasonably well and like just see and observe, is that I feel at a certain point, it's always going to continue to go, it's going to manifest into this thing where everybody was smaller, it was more tightly knit, everything was like that. And it was like open source, like everybody's kind of driving and rowing the boat at the same point. I actually don't know of a way, and again, we've talked about this before, where WordPress has gotten to this point now where it's so big, I don't know if there's actually, it's like completely uncharted waters. I don't know how you could possibly make everyone happy. I don't even know if it's possible to make everyone happy. But at the same time, I do think that there's conflicting things where you maybe have like, just as a figurehead, Matt Mullenweg has an idea for what he wants WordPress to be. He always has, and now he has to, like, again, we've talked about it for X, Y, and Z reason, has to actually like enact it a little bit more and put a little more pressure behind it or what have you. But then you also have like real, I mean, I'm sure it's always been like this. You would know there's always been thought leaders in this space of WordPress and WordPress adjacent web design, and they actually have like things that they say based in fact, reason, experience from all these other things that actually mean and make sense to a lot of people. And then a lot of times those views conflict. And I don't think it's like on purpose thing. It's literally just because humans have different thoughts and stuff like that. And this is where we kind of come, and it all comes back a little bit to the open source thing, because we have a project that I feel like, whether or not it was intentional or not, always kind of build as like, anytime you hear that word open source, it's like you're a part of it and you can enact like kind of the change and everything. But then and a lot of times to other people, it doesn't end up feeling like that, especially when it gets to this level. Again, I don't have any answers. I'm just trying to observe that. So
yeah, I think I'm rarely the glass half full kind of person, but in this case, I am, because I just look at the alternative, which is absolutely zero say, right, in anything, you know?
The one thing I would say that,
go ahead.
But I don't want to interrupt you there, but I think it's a really important point. The one thing is that I do kind of feel like, whether it was explicit or not, or it has been explicit or not, maybe it's just like the stuff that I consume. Would you rather have like a complete, I don't know what complete like dictatorial approach where like you absolutely know that you have no say? versus the other end of the spectrum where it's like almost anarchy, like you can kind of do whatever you want, like you have all the say, I don't know, whatever. But like there's a middle ground. Like the middle ground is always weird, where it's like you feel like you have a say, but then you don't end up actually having one, and now you're just confused. I'm not saying that's exactly where we're at. I'm just saying that I feel like most of the time people would rather be told exactly what the rules are rather than the rules being so obfuscated and gray. And again, it's a difficult thing. I'm not saying these are easy problems. I'm just kind of giving you my perspective on it, because I'm trying to be a little bit of the mouthpiece for the things that I hear and see and all that sort of stuff, just from the people that I associate with. So that's kind of always what I've felt really for like the last like year and a half, just like trying to feel everything out is it's really big. And I don't know if there's a way around those types of things, but that's kind of how I feel like a vast majority of people that are kind of in it feel like in it, to the extent that they care about the stuff that you make, stuff that I make, you know?
Yeah. I can certainly sympathize with, folks that want more clear cut, guidelines and rules. I think that's something that WordPress, the community, has always been seeking. Where are those upper limitations? Who's really doing what? Marketing team, what kind of access do you can you have? What kind of access do you have? What kind of access actually makes sense from, I know this is so hard to say at this day and age with what we've, uncovered with Matt and .org and stuff like that, but what kind of continuity, like, I think we've talked about this before, like any volunteer marketing team, like, can you really get pure Google Analytics access to an enterprise as big as .org? I know, given what we've come up with, but just hear me out. If it was, I don't know, I can't think of another like nonprofit off the top of my head that this would roll with, but like if there was a big nonprofit in your local town, millions of dollars worth, and you were all just volunteers, would you expect to get like access to Google Analytics and the data behind this stuff as just a volunteer? Probably not, right? Like, it's probably not going to get that access. So there's like these limitations that we run into. And I know that's super challenging. But I also look at it as, we have an opportunity to have some say in this stuff. And maybe that's not good enough, for people. I think people look at WordPress as something that is so vital to the open web. I agree. It's so vital to the open web that people should have it, but I don't think that's a reality. Like, I don't think that's a reality. It's not a utility, WordPress, right? It's not water. Okay. Like we can't have that. And, I think I think all of these questions that you have, and I still have, are really being pushed, or pressed right now because of what we've never seen anything like this. And this is really pushing the boundaries of open source and what it means.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I think that if a question was posed to like, again, just Matt as the figurehead, it's like every time that I'd have to go back. I'd have to know again, like 10 years ago, what the vibe was like, what the answers were like when anytime like he or anybody was asked a question. It's just like, I feel like it's always like, hey, somebody says, or a group of people say, we want XYZ in Gutenberg or in WordPress. Is the answer like, yeah, that's a really good idea? Or is it more like, yeah, like, well, like, I just feel like if I feel like every time I've heard, like, again, just Matt, as an example, speak, it's like it's not really answers. It's again, maybe big founder kind of like political speak almost in a way. And I just feel like that is something that people have just really just across society have just learned to just snuff out and just like, this is bullshit. Like, I'm tired of hearing like, maybe we will, maybe we won't, like this middle ground thing. It's more, if somebody asked me that question, it'd be like, yeah, there's like a pretty low likelihood we're going to do that. And then in some ways you might be pissed at that answer, but you might respect it a little bit more because it's like, okay, well, at least he told me like how he actually feels. Again, I'm not criticizing Matt. I'm not saying he's doing that specifically, but I'm just saying like from everything that I've, not just him, it seems like kind of more like that. It's like, we have a direction. We know what the direction is. You know, again, like we talked about the blogging, the publishing, like those are valid things, but then other people have different thoughts on where the platform should go, but at the same time are not specifically empowered to make those decisions. But people are, you know, I feel like there is a fair amount of people that actually agree with those sentiments. And then it's now you get to this point where like you have this like conflicting, like the brand and the people that back and have power versus like all the lay people, so to speak, or whatever, just the users that have opinions. And it's just like, now where are we at? It's like, are we listening to our users, or are we not listening to users? I mean, that's a whole nother conversation. Do we think that WordPress is listening to the users or not? Largely, we've had this conversation many times. I think there's a lot of inactive voices in the WordPress community that we don't even really know what they want, because they're just, you know, they're doing other things. So that's a whole different thing. But I mean, if we could go back just to like the very beginning of, because that's a lot of good context around open source. The thing I would say is like, do you believe that the word open source, when you hear it in the wild, is often like, when I said overused and misinterpreted, I meant because so many people like use it as kind of a buzzword. It's a real word. It means something, but I just feel like people are attaching more things to it than what it actually means, particularly in the context of WordPress, because really, I was going to tweet this out too, and we could have a discussion about it here because it's pertinent. I was going to tweet something out like, you know, we were having a chat. I think there's a thread in the WP Minute Slack, and I was thinking in my mind, the thing that was coming to my mind as I was putting all those pieces together is the revelation that there's WordPress, like the brand of WordPress that really everyone knows, like that's the real value of the name and like what the platform is. And then there's all the code, certainly. But those are two different things. It's like the code is open source. Like you could take WordPress and go do it, but the brand but you have to rename it, right? Like you wouldn't be able to just keep it. The brand itself is where the value is. And Matt Mullenweg, unless I'm getting something wrong, like owns that and controls that brand. So like that's where the actual value is mostly. Like obviously the code is valuable. Like I'm not trying to downplay the contribution of all the people making the code, but I'm saying that those are two very different things. And we are now in this, I feel like we're in this weird spot where people are saying open source and they're attaching these weird like brand attributes to it and whatever they're making, you know, like whatever the conclusions they're drawing. And that's not a one-to-one. It's like, yeah, the code's open source, but it's Matt Mullenweg's thing. And I just feel like that's not, I'm not even saying that's wrong. I'm just saying like, I like the clear vision of what's going on. And I just don't see it all the time. So.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many variables here, but they're certainly like Matt's vision of what that means to to be a WordPress contributor. Not only just like where the project goes and like how he divvies up like .org and .com initiatives or automatic initiatives, like how he sees contributions. There's him. There's like figureheads in the community. There's a lot of stuff. Like this is not easy.
Yeah,
but I think maybe your biggest issue, like just hearing you like play this out. So I'll answer your question with a question before I get to it. But I think your biggest issue is that people are thinking they have more of a say in this project, in the direction it's going. Is that really the biggest challenge you see out there when people are maybe misconstruing open source? It's that they just think that they have more ownership in this than they really do?
I think that's part of it. Is that the biggest? It's probably.
I see it as the biggest issue, but I don't know how you see it.
It's probably pretty big.
Yeah.
But that particular part of it only impacts the people that you and I speak to. Like it only impacts, it only impacts this 10,000, English speaking and obviously abroad people that like actually care. You know what I mean? Like that number that we've kind of like, talked about before. I feel like because everyone else like probably wouldn't necessarily care about that. The other thing that's like interesting though is that secondary part where people talk about WordPress like it is literally a project that's for everyone, by everyone almost. But really the brand I still think seemingly belongs to Matt Mullenweg, which again, I'm all for people doing their own thing, having their own thing. I love that. Like I think you should be able to have your own thing. But I'm saying that I think that just throughout the years, again, maybe not even intentionally, it has gotten to the point where everyone feels like this is like hugely crazy too, because it's 20 years in the making. Like I don't think in history, you know what I mean? Like this is kind of a phenomenon where there's so many people that, again, I say this all the time, that feel very attached to this platform and they feel like maybe they didn't build it, but they've been around for a long time. They want to see it continue to prosper and stuff. And then everything we've seen now is just kind of weird. It's throwing a little monkey wrench in there, and it's like, I didn't know it was like this. I didn't realize that, Matt had full control or whatever. That, whatever the thing is. It's just, so I think that a lot of people do feel like they have more of a say, and then I feel as well, as a little bit of a sidebar to that there's only certain ways that you can absolutely contribute to, which we've had this conversation ad nauseum, but I still think that there's extreme value in educating and providing thought leadership outside of a GitHub repo, but I've never really felt like that's actually fully appreciated necessarily to nth degree. It's tried, definitely. Not trying to make a complete blanket statement there, but yeah, that's kind of what I would. It's definitely a big challenge, and I think a lot of people are becoming tired of it. I feel like, in a way.
So I mean, there's probably you would have to go back to like Linux kernel, and probably roughly the same amount of time ago when WordPress was really blowing up. Like there was a lot of debate, and probably still is. I just don't follow it anymore by any stretch of the imagination. But the Linux kernel and that open source, and who has control over that? I mean, that was hugely debated way back, in the day. So there are projects. Probably Linux is the only other project at scale that you would actually even hear about the challenges of open source. Everything else is probably a lot smaller, Drupal being the next, and it's a human thing, and people not getting along, or seeing eye to eye and wanting the vision and ownership, yada yada yada. Ruby on Rails with DHH and his framework, it's just a much smaller footprint. Plus, WordPress is unique because you have just such, at least in my view, there's such a mix of people, hardcore developers, marketing and content people like you and me, end users, business owners, investors, venture capital, and then all the while, like the enigma of Mullenweg and the control over all of this stuff. There's just so much more. And plus it's massive. So you have like this perfect storm of like this massive thing powering a chunk of the internet for over 20 years, all these different kinds of people with different goals and ambitions. So it just gets amplified, much more than any other open source project. That's just me sort of framing. Yeah, there's probably the same stuff happening, just at lesser degrees in other worlds of open source. AI being one of them. I mean, we see this with DeepSeek. Allegedly, it's open source. It's open source. We don't know. But, Hugging Face is a massive open source community for all AI technologies. There's just a million technologies on Hugging Face versus one WordPress at that size. So, I mean, we see it. You just don't see it like you see it in WordPress. Plus, I think, I want to say, again, I'm rarely a half glass full kind of guy, but I think like there was a lot of loose structure built to have the democratic apparatus of WordPress, right? For better, for much more for worse, right? So it was kind of built, but it didn't really, it was kind of built like to have this democratic apparatus behind it. But, for years before all of this stuff, we were kind of like, all right, we all know Matt pulls the strings behind the scene. So I don't know, it was kind of good that was there, but also kind of bad because it led a whole bunch of people down this direction that they thought they had this ownership and this say, but they truly didn't, right? On one hand, I'm like, it's kind of cool that it was there. But on the other hand, it's like, it was a lot of false hope. So I totally get it. I get your point of view on that stuff.
You're saying that exists, though?
Say it again?
You're saying you agree with that, though? Like you that's your estimation that is the case. You've been here longer than me. Again, I'm relatively new.
You have, I mean, look you had meetups, you had WordCamps, you had, the bigger milestone WordCamps like US, before WordCamp Europe and Asia, like this stuff all evolved over time. And there was like this inertia that we were all there, man. Like, we're all there. We're all building this. This is all us, right? And then you'd have contributor days. You get there early, you write some documentation, like you're feeling like you're a part of this thing. And you are, and you're making a difference. Believe me, it's like
Yeah, certainly.
it made WordPress what it was, but you just never really had that full control, right? But you had teams, again, marketing team, media core. Don't even know what the hell's going on with that anymore, right? You have Slack, you have all these things where you can jump in and be a part of this stuff. So that's like that apparatus part where you kind of feel like there's something there, right? Like your local town or city has a parks board, historic commission board. Like, you have all these boards, and it's just like, oh, people can apply and be on these boards, and you're like, oh, we're all a part of this thing. We're all making this thing move forward. And you kind of had that semblance in WordPress. It's still there. I don't know how for much longer, but there was sort of that feeling like we're all doing this thing together, right? And that's that what I'll call that false democratic hope, that you all had a say, and you did have a say, but certainly the big direction of the project, of course, now with .org and .com, like we all know, like we never really had that control in the foundation. But I think that we were all led to believe it, not even intentionally.
Yeah.
Not even intentionally. There was like a hope that it was going to be like this democratic thing to a degree.
I think it also probably wasn't here, but I feel like who started WordPress meetups? You know what I mean? Like, just as an example, like it probably just kind of happened serendipitously because, people saw this thing. It was free. You could get into it easily. It was powerful. I'm sure Matt probably encouraged it heavily at a certain point, like when he saw what's happening. I mean, I could put myself kind of in that shoes. I don't know exactly what he's feeling, but like, you build this thing, people are adopting it like crazy, unbelievable timing. You know what I mean? Like all these variables together. And now you see all these people popping up, and they're like, I try to empathize as much as possible. If I was a founder of something like this, like, I got people that are making meetups about my shit, and like, like they want to do conferences, they want to do all this stuff. I'm sure he didn't like envision all that. Maybe he did, but I don't think he I don't think he was like had a premonition of like all this stuff happening, right? So it's like, I can totally get that. And I just feel like, it's a little bit of Monday morning quarterbacking type thing, but at the same time, it's like, I look at these things and I think, if I was going to do something anywhere, like even a micro amount of this scale, what would I like try to remember? And it's like, how do you keep the people's understanding of what is going on, like in check and in alignment with what you actually kind of want? And maybe as an example, him and whoever else, like, it kind of changed along the way as well. But I don't know. I'm looking at all this and I'm thinking, is there a way if we could replay it, or just like, know for the next like WordPress thing that we build or whatever. I'm not saying an alternative WordPress, but the next type of thing. Like, what will we do differently? I just think these exercises are important and educational. Like, would we focus on making sure that we're monetizing the backbone, like heavily monetizing the backbone of the thing that's free and open source, so we don't like get like to a point. I'm not saying it is, but it seems like that's partially it, right? We've talked about this many times where at some point you got to make money. It's just how it is. Yeah. And I know that Automatic does make money. I'm just saying that like the thing that you're giving away for free and is extremely valuable, you do have to somehow monetize some aspect of that to make sure that the people that are using that don't go out of business, or like the platform doesn't lose, adoption, right? Stuff like that. So I don't know. I just try to think about all that, and I'm not saying it's easy, but we're in a weird spot now.
I also think like there's open source, like things can be open source. And I think we're going to see this really get pushed because of AI coming up. Is like, if I'm starting to build little software solutions, and by the way, open source doesn't always have to be like software. If I'm starting to build out these little software solutions and I want to open source it, it's this tiny little thing that does just like plugins, any kind of tiny little plugin that's uploaded to WordPress.org. Your favorite, most basic WordPress plugin that does this cool little utility thing that you can't live without is open source. And it doesn't need to be maintained by 1,000 people and have the meetings and this apparatus that we've had with WordPress, because it just doesn't need it, does not require it. So I think looking at open source and What I don't want to do, here's what I'm trying to get at. What I don't want to do is to beat up on open source as a bad thing because of what has happened in WordPress. Right? Because
I'm with you.
Yeah, it's just the same thing. Like I have the debate with like Kevin and others, not just Kevin, but like don't let don't let video take over podcasting, because then we start to push out like the essence of free and open publishing, right? So I say the same thing about like open source. And I'm not this crazy open, like I'm not running, we've talked about it, I'm not running like Graphene OS on my phone. I'm not using a Linux computer like I used to back in the day. And by the way, neither is Matt. He's running iOS, and he's talked about, Matt Mullenweg, he's talked about this. He's still using Apple, which is closed source. Like you can't just be like 100% consumed by it. But the idea of that just existing challenges the status quo. DeepSeek, open source, challenged OpenAI. WordPress challenges any closed source CMS. And these things help balance. There's a balance there. Like the swing of the pendulum going side to side. And sometimes it's really good for WordPress. Sometimes it's really bad for WordPress. And I think the existence of this stuff challenges that status quo. And the one other thing I want to remark on is, before I forget, is keys to the kingdom.
Oh my God.
There is like, I think, for everyone, like saying the I know it's so hard to say these days, so don't come after me. But like for all of the criticism you want to give Mullenweg and WordPress, it still remains free and open source. You can still take it, walk down the street and charge somebody $10,000 to put a WordPress website together for you, $100,000. You can still profit off of this open source thing. So as much as you want to criticize it and beat up, Mullenweg and the decisions, some of them rightfully so, and the challenges of this stuff, you could still take from WordPress. You can still have a career off of WordPress. So that's why I say you can still take from it, but don't beat up on it. Again, Pearson from your podcast episode makes absolutely no sense to me. Build off the back of WordPress and then just beat it up because you didn't get along with Mullenweg and some of the things. You can debate the technology and the process, fine. But at the end of the day, like the thing still allows you to survive. And that's the thing for me. When I hear these debates from folks who have made a ton of money off the back of WordPress.
Yeah, I mean, I think that when I hear you say beat up on WordPress, I would need to know like almost specifics on what you mean. Like, what is your definition of beat up? Because maybe this is a weird thing that I and other people do. I just feel like criticism is valid in a lot of ways, especially the way it's delivered. Like, I feel like a lot of times when I'm saying things, I'm just like observing and I'm being like, I'm almost like asking a question. Like, I wonder why they did it like that. Or I think there might be a better way to do that. And people are free to not take like that into consideration. Sure, it's not my thing. I don't, whatever. But at the same time, I just feel like there's another angle of that, what you said there, where people are utilizing WordPress and they are charging somebody money for that. And they're doing it in a sense of they feel like that's the best decision for their business. And then, XYZ happens, new update happens, whatever. And it like, is just totally kind of like against what I don't know. I don't know. I mean, it kind of goes back to the yin and yang thing I think you were talking about, like with like closed source versus open source. And I'm really not 100% like I'm feeling that, but I would need to think about that more because it feels like a lot of stuff is closed source and there's not like, it feels like open source is kind of, from my macro lens of just the things that I watch, it seems like closed source is winning like a lot from what I've seen. Like if you see like all of the website alternative things that I see, a lot of them are closed source.
Well,
not a lot of them
I don't know.
open
You'd have
source.
to define what winning means, because WordPress still has a massive
I don't mean winning in like an absolute. I mean like winning as far as if you look at WordPress versus like these other ones,
Oh.
like if you like just as like WordPress or the alternatives, and then you see the alternatives, and a lot of them are like the Wix, Squarespace, Shopify, that type Webflow type thing. So I just this is again, I've talked about this before. This is a societal thing. I feel like we're just like becoming way less like willing to have like open source, and like you are a literal living testament to. You have to fight for it pretty much. And I don't know if people really want to fight for it. I think that they just want to have the thing that they want. And I'll tell you this much. I'll tell you this much too, okay? Because this is a different angle of this whole conversation, but it's very relevant. Let me compare and contrast two things. When I want a new feature in WordPress, or when I have that conversation, I would have to go into GitHub and make a ticket or whatever, and I don't do that nearly enough. Maybe I guess as I'm supposed to or whatever. Okay, fine, fair. But I'm making like WordPress videos and all that sort of stuff. I use SaaS products that are closed source, just like the things that you use, right? StreamYard, Restream, like whatever, right? When I want something changed in those platforms, I either go to the feature request or I find the person that actually makes that change and I tell them, and it's like normally pretty fast because I'm not like saying some weird niche thing. It's normally something like, hey, this is kind of like a very normal feature that needs to be in here. And if you guys want to compete with these other people, like I don't understand why I can't move things around on my streaming, setup like I would. And I did that for Restream and it worked. So maybe you're going to tell me just go throw it in GitHub, but I just feel like that is that dichotomy there, at least in my personal experience, has been very different. I feel like in one avenue. And it's not a dig at open source. I'm just wondering what are the inherent differences there? And then psychologically, societally, are we just becoming more of like a closed source capital money type system where like these people are paying us, we're going to listen to them from the brand perspective versus this is an open source project. We're going to do whatever the hell we want. We'll consider what you want, but ultimately we have our own things that we're trying to do here, whatever. You have to find your own developer basically that knows what they're doing to put these things in, that type of stuff. I don't know, just a bunch of thoughts there. I know there's a lot, but.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, the challenge, yes, 100% you are correct. Probably the most phenomenal thing I've ever heard you say.
Wow.
That you have to
Clip
fight,
it.
right? Like you have to fight for this open source thing. And this is why I don't give up on it, because the more you push it away, and WordPress still has a long way to fall. Trust me. But we've definitely seen some of these glacial moves over the last few months where you really start to feel threatened by it. But yes, you must fight. And I also believe that to some degree, I know the haters are going to come out, that Matt is also is fighting for it right now, fighting for his business Automatic to stay relevant. Pour one out if I wasn't in my office. Pour one out for Brian Cords, right? Fighting for his business to stay relevant, because he does sees Automatic as the only champion for WordPress. Whether you agree with that statement or not, I think that he believes Automatic is the only champion, and rightfully so, with the amount of hours and money that he's put into it. And he does want to defend that. I too want to defend it, not because I want it, because I want to be able to tell WordPress what to do. I want to have a say. It's cool. But I also want it to survive because I think it's a great app that humans should want from freedom of publishing. So yes, fight for it, for open source, fight for open publishing and the open web, technically. So there's that. The other stuff about, contributing and giving back, it's an imperfect system. It's an imperfect system. How many times have you called up, the paying corporate company, that's Xfinity, right? Your cable provider, if you have that in your area. And you're like, I got a problem with my bill. Okay, let me push you over here. You talk to this next person, I got a problem with my bill. Well, it's not in this department. Let me push you over to this department. And you're just like, God damn, I just want to get this thing solved, right? It's just an imperfect system that we have with WordPress, but a system nonetheless, which also, it contributes to its issues, right? Like, go put it in GitHub. I get it. Don't like it, but that's the system we have. I'm not saying it's perfect. And yeah, it takes one person from the GitHub aisle to reach across to the normie aisle and say, hey, what do you need? But then sometimes you have to go into the GitHub and go, what is an issue? Okay, I'll draft it and create it. I'll provide screenshots. There's a little bit of give and take. And that has certainly been an issue for WordPress. But also, again, as you watch the two camps collide, hardcore developers that get this stuff, average users who are trying to make a living with it. And it has caused, it's caused this rift over time. And again, it's just not perfect. Yeah, and that's how we've come to this pass, at least on like the communication side. Because I've always felt like no one's ever listened to me either. Right? Which is why I started a podcast to talk about this stuff from like the business perspective. And I think that a lot of folks don't feel heard and can't make progress in this space. But at least the space exists. It makes sense in my head. It's, when I say it, it's like we could have nothing. And on the commercial side, like you say, like commercial side is winning. Yeah, I mean, maybe on like a feature set level, but you would also say that Wix and Squarespace or Webflow are not as big as WordPress not just because of the dollars, but because there aren't people behind that machine pushing it forward. So it's like, it is a testament to the WordPress community that has pushed WordPress so far in its adoption, because there are people who do care, who say, nope, I'm going to start a web agency and I'm going to advocate for WordPress. Whether or not they even think of it that way, I think that is something that has really helped WordPress. And that's something that Matt definitely lacks in seeing, because, he's got his lane and he's seeing it from his perspective. He's forgetting that there are thousands of people who are like, cool, man, I don't even want to contribute. I just want to help this cool product. People use it. Just want to have people use it. And that's a huge reason why WordPress has been successful, is folks like you and me who have advocated for it. Again, whether or not you're thinking of it actively, like I'm an activist for this thing, or I'm like, hey, this thing's pretty cool. Let's use it. And it's free. It's this open source thing and a bunch of people use it. It's good to just like distill down to that and you're just like, cool, use it, versus this company I have no idea about, Wix. I don't know if that answers your question, but that was that's how I see that commercial side of defeating WordPress.
Yeah, I think that it's just, I really go back, the more and more that I talk about this stuff, and then in some ways it's really like a large conversation about, I don't want to say like large conversation about one guy, so to speak, but it is like a lot of it really comes back to, again, I feel like the control that Matt Mullenweg has. And again, I'm really like an open.
So you see that as a bad thing, right? Let's try to close this out with some conclusion. You see that as a bad thing with
What do you mean?
His control over this? Like, do you see his position in leading WordPress as a bad thing? This is me pulling the pin out of the grenade.
I don't think so. No, I don't know. I don't. Thanks. No, I don't think so, because I don't really care what the rules are. I keep saying it like that, but I don't know better. I don't care what the rules are. This is a life thing for me. I don't care what the rules are. I need to know the rules, or the circumstance, or the guidelines, or whatever.
Yeah.
I just feel like I've never really fully known that. But now we do. I feel like a lot of people didn't know that, truthfully. Okay.
Right.
And now it's a seismic shift.
Mm-hmm.
And now they realize that Matt Mullenweg is the king.
Mm-hmm.
And that's actually fine. When I say fine, it's like, thank you for telling me.
Right.
Now, with that information, I am going to make my own decision of whether I want to stay, how much I want to use the platform, how I actually have to literally this is a lot of shit that I've seen. Like, people have to literally refactor their whole thought process on WordPress. And again, I want to emphasize this. I understand people have been here for much longer than I have, like years and years, multiple decades almost, right? Like, they are going to, like, I can understand the turmoil that brings to somebody when you think it's been like one way the whole time, and now either, again, intentionally or just by need, or maybe the veil was pulled off. I don't really think that really is the case, but like, now it has to change, or it did change, or the the rules have changed, the guidelines, whatever, and now it's something different. So that's me. That's me. I don't actually. I wouldn't tell Matt Mullenweg. It's not the type of person I am that you have to do something with the platform that you poured all of your time, energy, and money into. That's not me. I'm not going to tell him how to do his thing. What I am going to do though is I'm going to observe that and I'm going to be like, okay, these are the new parameters that I'm operating in. How do I feel about that? What am I going to talk about? Because I'm free to have my own thoughts and opinions on it and use the thing if I still want to. So to answer your question more succinctly, do I think it's a bad thing that he has control? Not inherently. No, I think that I'm glad that we know it. And I think now the question becomes do we agree with what he is controlling and like what his thought process is and how he's handling it? I do think that with these new set of parameters and with what has happened, two things can be true at once. Like he could want open source to continue and say that and be like that, and also be ruining the thing that he has been building, like the community aspect of it.
Yeah.
I think those two things are true. And to me, I'm looking at it going, that just seems like a poor play from somebody that wants their thing to continue to be prosperous. And as a user in the community, I don't want to say I'm a thought leader by any means, but like somebody that makes some content around this shit, it's like, I can't just not say anything about that because this is a strange situation that we're in here where we have a guy that wants to be a steward of open source, actively is, and I don't want to go into the drama thing, but I'm just trying to like pull it all together. The open source thing really is at the linchpin of it, and it's used as kind of like the reasoning for a lot of it. But I still think that the actual definition of the whole thing is kind of like co-opted in a way where we just keep throwing more things to it. At the end of the day, it means that it's free to the public, right? And you can see the code. Does it mean anything else? I don't really think so on the surface.
Yeah.
Because all the other shit that people have been thinking about and attributing to WordPress are actually on the brand side, the business side, that a lot of like WordPress specific people, I feel like they're in business, like they're here and there, maybe they're employees, maybe they have their own plugins, but like this is big time fucking business. Like these small problems like 10 years ago are massive now because of how big this is. You know what I mean? Like anything like that, it's just how it gets. So, and it's just, again, this is so big that I don't think anybody's really ever seen something like this. The only competitor, like you said, is like Linux. So, and it's in a different industry entirely. So, yeah, I don't know if that answered anything, but that's how it is. I don't think he's bad. I'd have to continue to see what evolves, but those are my thoughts right now.
Yeah. Like I'm just not in the camp of, yeah, again, if I reflect on why it's always been WordPress, it's for me, it's not because I felt like I had a say in it. I just knew that this was a piece of technology that I could understand, look at, unpack, break apart, and know what's happening, regardless if I did anything with it. I just want to know like how this thing operates. Yes, it's under the GPL. Yes, there's a community behind it. There's all these like good things for it. But I like the idea of being able to see what this thing does, especially if it's going to contain my life's work. Overemphasizing a little bit, but if it's my blog posts, my media, my comments, my forum, like this is my thing, and I'm going to be able to move this thing around the web. Don't like it over here, I can move it over there. Want to change the way it looks, I can change the way it looks, right? And this is my thing that I kind of own. So that's why it's always been important to me to support it. Never felt like I was making an impact, on the software until I got my Command K, go to template parts button put in. I really felt like every time, I still use it every day, not every day, but when I'm in it, I'm like, I made this happen, or at least I was a small part of it. And, that is important too. But I mean, I just like supporting it because I think it's, I think it's important. I think what we've seen now, at least in my head, and I've been talking to a lot of other content management systems through cmsminute.com, and talking to these guys running their particular CMS. They have some open source components. They have free versions of it. But at the end of the day, like they're not free in GPL except for Ghost, although I don't know if Ghost is GPL, but it is open source. But some of them are like, look, we love that idea. We want to incorporate more, but we also need to survive and we need to make money.
Totally.
Totally get 100% right there for you, man. Like totally makes sense. Does that mean I would would I still choose your platform over WordPress? A little bit harder sell. But I think what all of this does is it starts to open up the idea of alternatives. And I said this before. I said this on the Fork WordPress with Kevin Geary. If you give me a blogging platform that is like WordPress, but slimmed down, ultra fast, open source, I think that's the play for anyone who's thinking about forking WordPress. Don't fork WordPress at its entirety and then go through the same challenges that we've had for 20 years, which is like, how do you build a website with this thing? Go back to the essence of it and build a project around blogging and putting words on the internet. That, I'd instantly go, there's another one? Okay, I'll definitely play with this on my blogging sites and stuff like that.
Well, we don't. That's top for another episode because I definitely don't. I got some thoughts on that we're not going to agree together there entirely. But the last thing I'll say here is
words on the internet are still viable? Is that what you're going to say?
They're definitely still viable. They're just not. If they're not below other mediums, it's decreasing fast.
Okay,
sure. So that's my shorthand version of that. But let me one thing on this is, and this is maybe another topic that kind of revolves around that, but this concept of I don't have any data. This is a hypothesis, just thinking about this. It is my belief, my hypothesis, that the world, again, and the general average person is not like you just explained there. Like the archetype that you just painted yourself as, that wants to know and values the open source aspect of things, that like cares about all that, I think is shrinking. I'm not saying it's a good thing. I just think it's happening. And it's purely, the assumption is purely based off of all of the social media that has sprouted up in the last 10 years or so, right? Where we're just handing our shit over, our data over into a locked black box. And we are, like, it's a give and take. Like there's people that are creating brands and and garnishing attention on these platforms. But at any time, they could pull the switch and it could be gone, right? But the problem is, and this is again another topic for a different discussion, is the level of distribution is like, the distribution part is so, you told me this, like, I mean, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but the distribution is so valuable that people are willing to do that and take those risks. And honestly, in some cases, I can't really fault them entirely for doing that. I do think maybe you should still have your own open source platform. Obviously, we're, proof of that and everything. But I'm just saying that I worry, genuinely kind of worry, and maybe this is the concept, is that I'm literally being swayed in that direction because I am starting to see all the perils of open source from WordPress, but also you can kind of, like you even just mentioned a little bit on the other platforms, they're not like full, everything's free, everything's open, because they understand that they still have to make money and they have to protect some of their shit. I kind of also totally agree with that if I put my blood, sweat, and tears into building something, I also want to kind of own it to a degree. Maybe not everything, but like the main shit that's going to make me money. That just doesn't sound like a good business decision to give everything away for free. So I think people are seeing all of the things that have came before them, the CMS stuff that's came before them, the open source pieces just in that realm. And they're like, maybe we're not going to do it just like that. And I feel like over time, it's going to continue to go that route where we just don't have, there will still be open source stuff, but it's not going to be like the entirety of everything that you have. And I don't even know, where's WordPress going to go? We talk about that all the time. Is one version, is 7.0 or whatever, you're just going to be like, oh, you know what? Everything before, still open, moving forward? Nah, you know what I mean? I don't know. So